but maybe we can use our time in questioning you to find out some important questions other than bonuses. And that is first maybe directed to our Pennsylvania Insurance Commissioner, because a good part of AIG's insurance is inspected by your department, and I know you're here for the National Insurance Commissioners, but could you give us an idea whether there's any real negative impact or risk to the insurance policy holders of AIG, specifically in Pennsylvania, but then, as you may know, countrywide?
As was just said by the gentleman from Standard & Poor, there are some threats on the horizon in terms of reputational risk and in terms of access to capital. But today, I can tell you that the 11 companies in Pennsylvania are strong. They continue to be roughly as strong today as they were in September. And so far, these threats have not materialized, and the insurance companies continue to be strong. Even if there were more threats, of course, the policyholders under these insurance companies would be fully protected. But today, I think the franchise value is still there across the set of AIG companies, both in the property and casualty business and in the life business, and we continue to watch it carefully.
So as I understand that, trying to be fair, if I were a policyholder, I would not fear the fact that my policy will be honored, can be honored, and the funds are there protecting me, so it will be honored. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Very good. As to the thrift regulator, I guess I'm just going to ask a simple question that I get asked every day when I'm home talking to people. Most people are astounded that the problem of AIG and their involvement in the derivative markets weren't picked up by the regulator and dealt with by the regulator. It seems that there was no whistleblower that occurred. And can you give us some evidence of what happened and why the regulator didn't pick that up?
Yes, sir. I'll start with the notion that indeed the Office of Thrift Supervision reviewed the performance of the $80 billion in credit default swaps that are really at issue with the government bailout that occurred last year. Of that $80 billion in credit default swaps that are primarily supporting CDOs, the underlying CDOs, I want to restate what I said earlier, sir, which is there has been no realized credit losses on those underlying CDOs. Credit default swap was written on the AAA super senior tranche of the CDOs. The risk in that portfolio, especially that $80 billion, the risk is the collateral calls associated with either the rating downgrade of AIG, the company, the rating downgrade of the CDOs, or the market value deterioration in the CDOs. We've been strongly looking at the FP performance since 2004. We had regular, what we call colleges with all the international supervisors each year. In 2007 and 2008, we very aggressively discussed the risk within FP in the credit default swap portfolio. About $306 billion of the $430 billion of the credit default swaps reside in a subsidiary in the UK that is actually a subsidiary of a French bank that is part of FP. So Commission Bancaire looks at that portion of the credit default swaps. But indeed, I do want to clarify, from our perspective, we reviewed and clearly understood and worked with FP with this risk. I also want to state that it's important to understand that this book of business, the subprime credit default swap book of business, stopped in 2005.
On that point, though, it seems to me that you're saying it wasn't our problem. We aren't responsible for it, so we would have to look somewhere else. So it's sort of a pointing game. The problem is we're going to have to find somebody ultimately that is responsible for the whole thing. And what do you envision the change should be so that this problem will never happen again?
Well, thank you, sir. Congressman, I want to go on record as saying OTS should have, in 2004, stopped this book of business with an understanding, with an anticipation with an analysis that suggested that the real estate market might get as bad as it's gotten in the last 2 years. That's a 2004 assessment. We should have done it. We didn't do it. There's a lot of people walking around who failed to understand how bad the real estate market was going to get. I in no way want to suggest that there's a pointing game going on here or we're looking at others. We do believe that this kind of company deserves the oversight of what we'll call a systemic risk regulator, and that systemic risk regulator would have 3 parts to it: the ability to examine, the ability to provide liquidity if there's a liquidity crisis, and the ability to place an institution into receivership if that's a necessary